everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We're going to give everyone a couple more minutes to log into the webinar and get settled. So we will be back and get started real soon. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, where we will explore the benefits of Windows Virtual Desktop Manager as a critical tool for your business. My name is Andrea Thomas. I'm the marketing manager here at SystemSoft Technologies. On behalf of our teams at SystemSoft and our co-presenter today at Nerdio, and of course our speakers, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you find yourself squinting at the screen right now, trying to see a small presentation, I've got some great news for you. You can enlarge the webinar window on the screen by clicking on the settings below. Feel free to take some time now to adjust your screen so you can see it. While you're doing that, I'll mention that we are reserving some time for a question and answer session at the end of our presentation. And while it's at the end of the presentation, you can actually submit questions you may have at any time during the webinar simply by posting them through the small window below. So with that, just take a quick look at our agenda today, which focuses on the use of Windows Virtual Desktop to answer the challenges your business may be facing with what many of us have seen as a suddenly and ongoing remote workforce. Our speakers will discuss 3 keys to designing and implementing a Windows Virtual Desktop Manager strategy fast and effectively for your organization. We believe that there's some significant benefits you may be missing out on without the right strategy in place. Things like improved employee productivity, reduction in IT infrastructure costs, not to mention ever-increasing importance in enhanced security, control, and compliance. And as I mentioned earlier, at the end of the webinar, we'll reserve time to answer any questions you may have about the information presented today. As you can see from our agenda slide, we do have 2 speakers with us, Mr. Don Bilbrey, SystemSoft Senior Cloud Architect, and Mr. Will Aminsky, who joins us from Nerdio. Don, I'd love to hand it over to you now so you can give us a quick intro and then dive into the presentation.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, as Andrea said, my name is Don Bilbrey. I've been in the industry for well over 20 years and in the cloud since 2008. Different roles, with Microsoft, with AWS, et cetera, doing different projects and such, like work with Prime Day. But today, I want to talk about kind of the changing field that we have. About a little bit less than a year ago, right around March or April, depending on your different groups, you saw a pretty big shift, what I would call a huge disruptor to most businesses. And, before we had these, standard regulated office environments, and now it's just kind of chaos out there with, separate technologies, people pretty much, working from home. And, there's a lot of people that like it, a lot of people that dislike it, but what can't be denied is the technology. You're probably either struggling with the technology for remote workers, or you're at least having some pain points. And so let's talk a little bit about what those could be for you. One of the big things that we see as a challenge for remote work is, when we all kind of left the office, there's simply no physical access to work computers on premises. And this is really troubling for, groups that are, taking care of like law or, financial information that you would never dream of having, remote worker access before, now that this is the new norm. So how do you manage that? How do you make that work? I know early on during the pandemic, Costco is a good example of one of the companies that it just had a real strong, corporate philosophy that if you weren't at your desk, you weren't working, kind of thing. So they had a kind of a no work from home policy. And so when they first went over there, they came to us and said, "Hey, you need to help us kind of get our remote work figured out." And what their plan was to buy a bunch of laptops and memory and get that worked out. Rather than going to some kind of virtual desktop, because the concept just didn't occur to them. And so, we really want to work with them to try to get them into a different space, right? But that also leads to the next unique challenge, which is the end users want a familiar desktop environment to continue their work. Patterns matter, and I can tell you, right when the pandemic happened, every other week to every week I was traveling. And when we went to the work from home and not visiting customer sites, that was a huge change for me. And at first I was kind of relieved because, the first week I was like, wow, I don't have to do all this travel anymore. By week 3 or 4, I was, kind of thinking this was weird, and my productivity dropped. And by the 3rd month in, I think I was going stir crazy, and cabin fever was kicking in because I was just so used to that routine I had built up over the years of traveling. Well, the same thing happens with your users. And my guess is you probably saw similar productivity drops when you switched to work from home. Some people work great in a work home environment. Some people don't. Having that consistent work environment is key to kind of helping keep that productivity up. Also, if you talk to any of your security officers, I guarantee you they have nightmares about unsanctioned services and people downloading, whatever to their PCs at home. It's very hard to keep control of what's going on in the work environment when the work environment is so everywhere. The traditional virtual desktop environments like Citrix and VMware, they're extremely complicated to set up and manage, and they work great for that sales team you had out there, that executive team that you had out there. That was, on the road, but it really can tax your ISP circuit, and most of the networks just weren't set up for it. And last but not least, standing up virtualization, it can be expensive and it can take months to set up, specifically if we're talking about Citrix or VMware. So let's take a look at, shortcomings of not using a Windows virtual desktop environment. As I was speaking to earlier, people got used to just, walking down the hall and talking to people, so, not having that office environment, it creates process inefficiencies. You could be losing money by licensing, licenses that you're not taking advantages of, and updating Windows. As a matter of fact, most of your Office 365 license or Windows 10 license gives you access to this without any extra cost. So you may already be paying for the technology and just not utilizing it. And we can help you figure out if that's the case. Security is huge. I know there's a number I like to throw out all the time that I saw in the past was 98% of companies know they have a security risk. They either don't have the time or the money to resolve it. And of course, your IT group's never going to come out and admit it. But in most cases, if you're using like a VPN to connect and your financial data is going out, it's not a matter of if that data is going to get out at some point. It's kind of a matter of when. And then also, limited access to, employees have limited access to security capabilities, specifically if they're using a VPN. Loss of productivity and time, limited administrative ability. It's hard to understand what's going on, what people are doing with those assets. You don't have that single pane of glass to see what's going on. And there's obviously compliance issues. You could be violating GDPR, for instance, because people are downloading information to their personal, devices. They shouldn't be. So what? Let's take a look at the poll question here real quick, just so hopefully people have had time to go in and answer it. Actually, I don't think it actually started, so we'll come back to that. But go ahead and take a moment, if you would, to go over to the poll. And there's a poll out there that talks about how are you connecting today, right? Are you using a VPN? Are you using Citrix, VMware? whether it's that or some other technology. And I'll come back to that question a little bit later in the presentation. So what are the problems solved by Windows Virtual Desktop? Well, quite a few, actually. So Windows Virtual Desktop allows you to avoid the complexity of a virtual desktop environment like Citrix or VMware that we talked about earlier. You can publish entire Windows 10 desktops and specific applications. So it really looks just like that environment. I talked to people before, and they say, well, I really don't want to use, some kind of virtual desktop interface, because back in, 5 years ago, I was, using it, and I was talking to a coworker earlier, and he basically said, look, it was slow, it was cumbersome, I didn't like the interface. And that was true in the past, but now it looks exactly like a desktop that's sitting in front of you. So you'd be fine using it. As a matter of fact, we use it for very high-end applications like CAD, something you would never think that would be a viable solution for a virtual desktop, but it is. You can control costs by right-sizing and scaling on demand. You can offload traffic from the VPN appliances to, in other words, it's not going to be hitting maybe that 1 gig or 5 gig pipe that you have for all your employees, right? It utilizes the cloud. So as long as somebody has a good connection to the cloud, they're going to have a great Windows Virtual Desktop experience, and everything's going to be saved up there. You get the experience of a local desktop from anywhere. Specifically, this can be from a phone. And I know a story about a guy that he had an issue where his laptop had crashed on him right before he was going to do a presentation. Now, this was pre-pandemic, so he was on site. But yeah, he had an issue where the device died on him that he was going to do a presentation on. So he simply opened up his phone, accessed the Windows Virtual Desktop from his phone, and was able to present straight from there. Kind of saved the day for him. And that kind of leads into the next thing, is you always have access to your files through OneDrive for business or Azure Files or on-premise file shares. And you have quick access to mail, data, and profile information. So if you're in between computers and you just want to quickly pull up your email, you don't have to worry about anything. You've already got that information right there at your fingertips. What sets Windows Virtual Desktop apart from other technologies? Well, it has the ability for employees to access geographic from any geographic location in any browser-enabled device. It could be a tablet, phone, anything that you can connect to the internet with. You have the ability to set up as a virtual desktop environment. It provides secure access to applications, and this is huge. Your information never leaves the server on the cloud. It doesn't get downloaded to the device ever. So that's huge. It's optimized for Office 365 and OneDrive, and it offers centralized management from a single interface. And it also supports Windows 7. I know that maybe isn't a huge issue for most folks, but if your company is still running Windows 7, you're going to have that ability with extended security updates through 2023. So I've kind of given you guys all the, hey, this is great, wonderful stuff about Windows Virtual Desktop. What are the pitfalls? And there are a few. One of them is if you use the native tool itself, the control plane isn't great. The GUI isn't an awesome for the service management. There's no group support. Users must be assigned individually. And it's hard to manage costs if not right-sized. And Windows doesn't necessarily, or Azure doesn't necessarily make this obvious to you, right? So that's one of the things that it's really helpful to try to understand those costs and how to get that reined in. It would be very easy to oversize the environment without some type of cost management tool. And then multiple authentications are required to log in. First, you need to log into the device, then you need to log into the actual Windows Virtual Desktop. There's no support for passwordless sign-in, and general user access, the access experience is not as good as competition, right? So those are the pitfalls, but there's good news. We have a solution for all of those pitfalls. And so, what kind of segues into a little bit of our next discussion, or our next portion of this discussion, which is what are the 3 keys to a successful Windows virtual desktop deployment? And the good news is it's easy as 1, 2, 3. You need to automate the deployment. You need to employ a single pane of glass to manage that, so that once it's in the wild, you can see what's going on, and you need to understand your costs. So simple, right? Anybody could do it, right? So let me show you how we do that. And to do that, what we do is we incorporate a great tool called Nerdio. It's not the whole story, but it definitely gets us, to the 80-yard line, and we can do the last little 20 yards to get to that touchdown. And so, how does that all look how do we actually go about deploying Windows Virtual Desktop? And the great news I've got for you guys is most of the environments that we worked with, we're able to really deploy the whole environment in less than 4 hours. Now, that's not going to hold true for a company like Costco or, T-Mobile, or if you have, 40,000 users. Yeah, it's probably going to take us long. Well, not probably, it will take us longer. But if your company is 2,000 employees or less, most of them we can do in half a day. And we've done it over and over and over again. And so here's how the process kind of plays out, right? So the first thing we need to do is assess the current environment, and we use a tool called Azure Migrate to do that. And it goes and takes a look at your environment and tells us how much it's really going to cost to get you into the cloud to begin with, and what kind of VMs do we need to set up. We then hand it over to the Nerdio tool, which goes in and estimates the cost of the Azure deployment. It builds out an environment for the workloads to land, and connects to the Azure deployment for the existing environment. At that point, we replicate the existing VMs in Azure and copy the data over. And once that's there, we really have what we consider a deployment done. But that's not the whole story, right? I remember I had that 1, 2, 3. Well, at this point, we need to put in a cost optimization tool, and we need to have that single pane of glass to manage everything. And that's where Nerdio comes in again with the auto scale. It'll take a look at your VMs, how the people are actually using it, and it can either upsize or downsize based off of that. So you get a really good idea. And another interesting thing is, if your workforce isn't working, right? So at night, you can actually have those auto scale down when they're not using that environment. Next, it basically puts that single pane of glass in there. And the really good news is, if you're a smaller company, a boutique shop, and you really don't want to mess with any of this, we're more than happy to take a look at that for you and manage the whole process for you. We can send you reports, tell you what's going on, show you if there's any security breaches, et cetera, et cetera. That's a service that we can offer on the side. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But for now, what I like to do is introduce you to Will over at Nerdio, and he's a director, and he can kind of tell you about himself and go deeper into the Nerdio product. He's also going to talk a little bit about case studies of customers we've worked with in the past, and he will actually talk you through a demo of the actual product. Will, go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dom, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for your time today. Really excited to talk to you all. Again, my name is Will Ominski, and I am a Director of Sales here at Nerdio. And I've spent most of my professional career working with IT service providers and integrators, slowly as time and as technology has evolved, bringing them and helping people adopt cloud technologies. And I'm really excited today because Azure and Microsoft has finally kind of answered the call of what people have been asking for. All right, just like Don said, Windows Virtual Desktop solves so many issues for people, and things that previous versions of hosted or cloud or VDI type desktops really never could do before. So now we have the technology there, but it is Azure, it is complex, and that's why we work with integrators like SystemSoft, right? So you can have a complete and whole solution. So in terms of Nerdio Manager for WVD, which is the name of one of our products that we're talking about today, the key things that we hear from end customers when they're thinking about a WVD strategy or an Azure strategy, we really can kind of help out with, kind of like what Don said, is operationalizing this. right? If you go out and try and do it on your own, Azure's fantastic. But it's almost like Legos without a real great instruction booklet, right? Your company and organization is unique. You have your own unique challenges, your own unique setup, your own unique needs. And what we can do is we can operationalize and give you that track, which we've done for many companies with SystemSoft, right? And give you a wizard for provisioning, for example. Give you 3 clicks or less for adds, moves, changes, and updates to the environment. And that stuff's really critical in making sure that this is a successful rollout for your organization. Of course, costs, right? Costs are huge. Everybody's trying to save costs where they can. Budget management within an IT department is big. And this is also where we get a very big win, because with Azure, they want you to consume as much as possible. And they don't really make it easy to save money in many cases. So what we've done is we've developed our own technology that allows you, as Don mentioned previously, to intelligently add resources when your users need them, and then remove those resources when they don't. And in my experience and view of the world, right, this is kind of the gold standard of IT. If you think about normal environments or on-prem, pre-COVID even, when you buy a server or you buy infrastructure, you spend all this money on it. But most of the day, it's just sitting there not being used, right? You have people that leave at 6 p.m. and then they aren't in all weekend, and then they come back in on Monday, and you have a meeting, and they might not be even hammering away on their laptop, right? And so it's very inefficient. So we can provide you those operational and cost efficiencies with our software, but also walking that fine line of giving you that reduced cost, but also making sure that you have the best performance possible for your end users, so people aren't complaining and noticing that you're doing things and pulling these levers to save some cost. And then even maybe one of the most important things when we think about today's challenges is reinforcing your security and your compliance and your policies and data residency. We think about, especially if we're a company like Costco and used to everybody just working in the office, and there's probably some good reason for that, and that comes down to concerns about data loss, right? So we want to make sure that we can alleviate those concerns and really control that whole environment and have a good view of everything that's going on within the environment without maybe having to be an Azure expert. We work with, through SystemSoft, and many of their customers are internal IT departments, right, that understand networking, they understand Windows, but in many cases, these newer technologies in Azure itself is somewhat new to them, right? And so that's why it's really important to lean on some experts and people who do this all day long. So I want to talk about a couple case studies that we wrote up that are kind of common scenarios, things we see over and over and over again in organizations approaching SystemSoft and then bringing Nerdio in as well to help with their challenges. So this first organization, it's a really, really large national legal research organization, very well known, and their problem was they were very siloed. Right, there's a very large organization, and they basically built these individual environments for their individual departments and locations to support their individual needs. And that ended up becoming very complex and costly overall to be able to support. And they really noticed a lot of these challenges came to the forefront when immediately all these people needed to work from home. Right, they had a mix of RDS, VMware, Citrix, all these different technologies. And so what they wanted was, really easy deployment path. I mean, they had something that generally worked for them, although it had a lot of problems. They didn't want to disrupt their end users either by creating new problems, trying to solve old problems, right? And so with working with our integrators like SystemSoft and Nerdio, we could very quickly and easily stand up hundreds of desktops in a proof of concept in one of these locations or one of these sites. And once that was proved out, it was very easy with the click of a couple buttons and the scalability afforded to you through Azure to spin up thousands of users after the pilot was done. right? And so this really allows them more centrally, from a management perspective, to be able to manage their sites. It is also very transparent for billing for the different IT departments and organizations within the larger company. And maybe most importantly for them, the users having that familiar Windows 10 desktop experience. I say this all the time when talking to people, and I really do think it's true, and Don alluded to this as well. I don't care how good any new technology is. I don't care how much cheaper it is, faster or stronger it is. If your users have to drastically change the way that they work, you're going to get pushback from them. And they're going to start telling you things like, it doesn't really work that well. And so what we really want to do is give them that really familiar experience. And so we can do that in a very, very predictable way with Windows Virtual Desktop. The next one, I find this one really interesting because it's an engineering firm. And this organization needed about 700 employees to be able to work from home and be just as productive as when they were in the office, but they were all using GPU. They were using those high-end pieces of software like AutoCAD, where if you think back to the 5 years ago and previous versions and other types of hosted desktop technology, you would say it can't be done. Right, I can't give you that same type of performance as I'm used to on-premise with my big beefy endpoint in the cloud or in a hosted desktop, but that's actually available now, right, within Azure. They have these, they're called N-series machines. They have GPU cards in them, and they really are designed for these types of workloads. Right, so this was really huge for the success of this organization, and you know, maybe you're not even using or needing GPU in your organization today, but again, I like to illustrate this because again, this shows that the technology has come along so far that it can kind of take anything you throw at it. Right, if we can do high-end AutoCAD 3D rendering like with this organization, then if you need to run Teams or Zoom, you know, or some type of application like that, which again might have struggled in the past, we can handle that. Right, Azure and Windows Virtual Desktop can kind of take whatever you throw at it. Now, the downside for this organization is these machines with GPU are very expensive, very, very expensive. So normally, this would be extremely cost prohibitive. And so that's where the auto-scaling technology really makes it very easy for them, or easier for them, to fit into their IT budget. Without the auto-scaling, and what most people do, without working with integrators like SystemSoft and using a software like Nerdio, you end up kind of having to leave the machines on all the time, right? So when you leave them on, and in Azure, you pay for it if the machine is on. So we really want to kind of balance that, that performance with the cost needs of the organization. And similarly, with this international software organization, they had actually gone out and decided in their internal IT department for using Windows Virtual Desktop. Right, they were testing it out internally, and they really liked it, but they also identified some gaps. Right, performance, managing images, templates, golden images, those types of things. And then they were also noticing in their pilot that, again, machines were kind of running 24/7 because there's no easy way to turn them off automatically natively with the Azure toolset. So that's where SystemSoft comes in and can do that assessment that Don talked about previously, right? Take a look at the overall picture of this, and because SystemSoft has this processed out, very easily plug that into the Nerdio software. And for an organization like this, you know, being able to layer our software into that existing proof of concept, there's no, as the direct quote, if you look at the outcome on the bottom, there are no crazy requirements, right? Just very easily integrate Nerdio into the environment without having to make massive changes, and then enable the auto-scaling capabilities. And, you know, in this organization, they save about $70,000 per month in their Azure infrastructure costs, because of the scale, number of employees they had, different regions, all of that type of stuff. So there are some huge benefits that you can get with these types of things. And again, these are the common scenarios that we see all the time where people kind of discount Azure, because I feel like Azure sometimes has the stigma of, you know, not only is it complex, but it's really expensive for what it is. So this is not an easy move. We need 3 years to plan this. But when you're working with somebody like SystemSoft and automation technology like Nerdio, it allows you to very quickly and easily and predictably layer this into your IT strategy. All right, so at this point, I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, and I'll just give you a quick demonstration of what exactly some of these things that we've been talking about look like. So let me share. And hopefully everybody can see that. And I am in the Nerdio software. So I don't know how many people on this call have actually gone into the Azure portal or managed any Windows virtual desktop, but if you have not, I definitely encourage you to go to portal.azure.com and kind of poke around a little bit. It's very easy to get a free trial account. But you'll notice with that, it's very complex. There are all these different submenus, and there are all these different sections, and you kind of really have to know what you're doing in there. And so what we do is we remove that complexity by making everything very easy, point and click. And so this is how we can stand up environments very, very quickly, and then also allow you, internal IT, or your partner in technology like SystemSoft to be able to manage this very predictably and easily. So right now, I'm looking at just the main interface page of this deployment. And you can see I have this navigation panel on the left where I can kind of scroll through and manage different things. So I'm just going to hop over to another tab I already have preloaded here for desktop images. So one of the first things you'll need to do after deployment is build out your images that your users will log into. And image management in Azure is probably one of the more complicated things when we think about Windows Virtual Desktop. So as an illustration of how we've made this a very easy to do process, first of all, when you start out, you would not have any desktop images. So you can actually bring in images in a number of different ways. So you can actually bring them in from an existing Azure virtual machine, or more commonly, where people get started is they're going to import one that's made available to us from the Azure Marketplace. So there are a number of different images that get you your starting point. So you can simply go through and choose whichever build you want. Maybe you want Office already installed on it. You have some other very easy basic things that you can configure in here. Give it a name and a brief description. You can choose what size or type of virtual machine that you're going to deploy on in the disk. You may have multiple resource groups, time zone, and there are a whole bunch of other different things you can do. But you can see you kind of don't necessarily need to be an Azure or WVD expert to be able to do this. You simply hit OK, and that's where the Nerdio magic comes in, and we've created all the processes and back-end scripting that needs to be done to add that image into your environment. Now from there, it's as simple as clicking the power on button, remoting into that virtual machine, and now you're in a normal Windows machine, which you probably, there's a good chance, right, that you know how to install applications on a Windows machine. So you simply install applications like you normally would. Once that is complete, all you have to do is click power off and set as image. Now I know, again, this looks pretty easy, but there are a whole bunch of processes in the back end that actually need to run through in Azure if you're going to do these things. And so this is where we take that complexity out and allow you to, within hours, be able to stand up an environment, right? It doesn't take that long to add a starting point VM, install whatever custom applications that you need, click power off and set as image, and then you can start assigning users to that. And I want to give you another example, kind of what Nerdio can bring to the table with our software. Well, I mentioned power off and set as image. So you can see, did this earlier this week. And if you were doing this manually in Azure, there are a whole bunch of processes, as I mentioned. So we can actually show you those in the details. We're going to show you all the steps that we actually run through in terms of packaging that. So imagine your internal IT department having to run through all these different steps in the Azure backend. It'd be pretty easy to miss something, right? And that's why we have a whole process with SystemSoft to be able to make this very, very easy for you. Right? We're running a whole bunch of scripts, we're packaging it, we're sysprepping it, and setting that up to deploy to your end users. The next thing, and again, one of the more common reasons why people are able to do this is the auto-scaling technology. So here I am. This is one of my pools for my users that is using one of those images. So here's a very similar screen to what we looked at before. Try and give you consistency in here. And I can very quickly and easily set up my auto-scaling boundaries. So we can choose what counts as an active host right here, which is normally the virtual machine is started. And then we can choose how many machines are actually in that pool. So how many do we want to be in the pool available for users to log into, and then how many are active? So you can see here, I want to go down to 0 machines. So when people don't need them, we're going to turn the machines off. Right? We're going to make it so there are no machines in there. And if you noticed earlier in the top right corner, when we're at a minimum, we show you what that cost is for your compute. Very, very low, right? Because we have no machines there. And then at a maximum, when we're fully burst up, when we have users demanding that. So we're going to try and manage that automatically for you. We also can walk that line in terms of additional capacity when it's needed, so your users do not suffer because we're trying to make this fit within our IT budget. So we're going to burst beyond these 3 machines up to an additional 4 as they're needed. And there are a whole bunch of settings in here, but again, I'm keeping this as kind of simplistic as possible. Now we have some different triggers that you can do for when to add machines into this pool. Right, so when am I going to add a machine up from that base or minimum active capacity? When am I going to provision another one? And so you may choose something like CPU utilization and say when CPU utilization hits 50% for 5 minutes, we're going to add 2 more hosts or 1 more host. Right, so before people start feeling some pain because of performance, let's give them more resources. First, we will start consuming or adding in that base host pool capacity. Once that is consumed, we can actually burst beyond that with this bursting capacity. So we can actually go up to 7 machines. And then we need to set our conditions for removing virtual machines from the environment. So again, when people start leaving in the evening, 6, 7 p.m., right, we want to not pay for machines to sit there and idle like we would with a physical machine or servers that we're buying in our office or our data center. So what we do is set the threshold for that. So in this environment, when CPU utilization drops below 30% for 15 minutes, we start removing machines. And this is exactly where SystemSoft comes in. Right? This is where we come in and work with you to figure out how to balance this most efficiently for your use case and your needs and managing your budget. We also can set in some different things for scale and restrictions. I maybe don't want to remove machines in the middle of the day. Right? I know my users, I'll go out to lunch around 12 or 1 o'clock and CPU might drop down. So don't remove them just for me to add them back in. Right, so we can pause that removal process between certain hours. You can also choose aggressiveness. So this is really useful depending on the types of groups. Right, that environment that's using AutoCAD, we're not going to be as aggressive maybe because they want that extra horsepower. We don't want to boot users off to save costs. Or maybe the administration or the front office or back office staff, something like that. Maybe we do want to boot those users off. So we have a lot of different settings here. We can pre-stage. So if we know we have 1,000 users that are going to log in at 9 a.m., we don't want to be bursting up 1 machine at a time, right? So we can say, but Monday through Friday if everybody comes in at 9, I want machines ready to go at 9 a.m. and have 4 of them ready to go, or 5, or whatever number it is. So that way, those machines are sitting there waiting to be used. If we're going to remove machines, we can give users warnings and a certain amount of time to save their work. And then one of our newest features is auto heal. So we can actually define what a broken virtual machine is in Azure. Right, so we'll define what that is, and then we will automatically go in there and try and restart and fix that for you. So these are where you can see those labor savings within these environments, right? You don't want to have a whole bunch of people not being able to work because machines are broken within Azure, right? It is IT, things do happen, so we will go and save you a whole bunch of time on the management. So again, just kind of a high-level overview. I know that was a lot of information in a relatively short period of time, but I also hope that helped illustrate how easy and processed out that we've made moving to Windows Virtual Desktop through our partners like SystemSoft. So I'm going to stop sharing here. We'll go back to the slides. And I believe Don's going to take this over.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Yeah, and we didn't get a chance to go into the monitoring and other features, which we're happy to go with you. Which kind of leads me to my next thing. We actually have a quick strike for folks who want to see this in their environment. And the really good news is we are funding this engagement. We're not going to do your whole environment, but we can deploy up to about a quarter of your users within a few hours. And how long does that take? Engages usually last around 4 hours, and that's from first phone call to completely wrapped up. We can usually deploy within about 2 hours. So let's say you have 600 users, we could deploy up to 150 of those users onto a Windows Virtual Desktop and let you see it in your environment, see how it is, kick the tires, decide if you want to do more. And then you can see all of the benefits of it. So if you're interested in that, please check us out and go to sstech.us/WVD quick strike, and we can have someone reach out to you and get that process started. Again, we are funding these. There's no cost to you other than what you consume within Azure. With that, let's go ahead and go on to the question. Actually, I want to quickly, looking at the poll results, it looks like 50%, at least 50% of you are using VPNs today. And VPN is great technology, but it really was never intended to be what, utilized for what this is, what's going on today, and that's everybody being remote. So there is some bandwidth issues. I mean, you're probably overspending or seeing connectivity issues, at least at the very least. Depending on how you're utilizing VPN today, I know Office 365 and some of that stuff kind of offloads some of that traffic, but and Teams does help some too. But if you're having everybody go to a file share within the actual corporation or go to big databases, I'm sure you're seeing some network struggle, and there is some security concerns there too. So you should definitely reach out and talk to us about taking a look at Nerdio, specifically Windows Virtual Desktop, and see how it runs and if it's a good fit for you. So with that, let's go ahead and go on to the questions portion of the webinar.
Yes, thank you, Don, and thank you, Will. Also, thank you to everybody who took the poll. We appreciate you participating in the presentation today. As Don mentioned, we will move into our question and answer session, and we do have some questions that have come in. So how does Windows Virtual Desktop compare to classical RDS environments?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. Windows Virtual Desktop exists only on the Azure platform. It's entirely managed by Microsoft, and that's a pretty big difference in itself. The other main difference with RDS is that the Windows 10 multi-user concept. Microsoft has rewritten the code for Windows 10 client so that it allows multiple users to connect to the same virtual machine simultaneously. This is only possible on a Windows server so this wasn't, this wasn't possible before, and the functionality does not even exist with that functionality does not even exist within an RDS environment. It's only on Windows Virtual Desktop. So, your licensing could be drastically reduced. Is I guess the point I'm trying to make.
That's actually a good segue. So you want to talk about that and how licensing and Windows Virtual Desktop would be different from RDS? Sure.
Yeah. It's definitely different. While licensing for RDS is a very complex and challenging matter, there's a lot of companies out there that have licensing experts, and that's all they do. They kind of try to crack the code, and there was a cereal box probably in the 1970s that had like a decoder ring that you need to figure all this stuff out. So Sally has it, so she's got job security. But all kidding aside, all that complexity is removed with Windows Virtual Desktop. The users are licensed by assigning a Windows Virtual Desktop compatible or M365 Windows 10 license, and that's it. If you have that license for Windows 10 or you have that Windows for Office, M365, that carries over. So essentially, if you register a user, she or he is working with Windows Virtual Desktop. If the user is not registered, there's simply no access. So there's no consumption. There's no license incorrectly. There's no worry about audits.
Great, thank you. Another question here. How does Windows Virtual Desktop handle ID security and networking security?
Yeah, kind of what we were alluding to before, right? With do you really know what your employee's doing? I mean, is he clicking on the email with the cat meme and suddenly there's a breach? Well, so this would be a kind of a relief for the security experts. There's no access from the outside world to a session host of your Windows Virtual Desktop environment because there's no inbound port needed to be opened. In contrast to RDS, where you have to open inbound ports and allow user connectivity. Furthermore, Windows Virtual Desktop allows you to secure user identity by enabling multi-factor authentication with a phone or other device, in addition to the username or password. When you combine this with conditional access, the administrator has control over who is allowed to access what, irrespective of the location of the device.
So our next question, what is the advantage of profile containerization over user profile disks?
Yeah, this is really big, and it's really about. So let me go back a little bit of history here. In 2018, Microsoft acquired FS Logic and introduced a new way of managing user profiles. So in Windows Virtual Desktop, the user profiles, they're no longer supported. Instead, what it does is it puts the user profile information into a container and attaches and detaches the information every time a user logs in and out. That comes with a lot of advantages. Number one, it speeds up the connectivity process, but it also eliminates the corruption of user profiles, and it caches OST files with email, task, and calendar entry. So I guess the short answer is it speeds everything up, and it stops the corruption that you might have seen, like in other platforms like Citrix, where a user profile gets corrupted, and that can be a pain for the IT department. So, huge technology upgrade. It should hopefully make users' lives a lot easier.
Our next question is actually a question for Nerdio. Do you have a product for AWS?
Good question. We do not have any products for AWS at this time. As Don mentioned, Windows Virtual Desktop is only available in Azure. It is a Microsoft native product. And, when we were developing and kind of looking at different things, we looked at businesses, right? What's common out there? Most people are standardized on the Microsoft stack. Because of that, there are optimizations and cost benefits just natively going with Azure, since that is operated and owned by Microsoft. And so currently today, we are only running on Azure.
Thank you, Will. Okay, those are our questions for today. Obviously, if you have other questions, we can certainly address those. I'll go back a slide here. But feel free to, well, first of all, feel free to reach out to Don or Will, but we also have our website listed here on this slide at the bottom right of the slide here. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you again to our speakers, to Dawn and to Will, for going through this presentation. It's great insight and great information that you shared with us today. And again, thank you to our audience for being here. We hope you found the webinar helpful, found it insightful, and look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.